Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Ready?
Yep. Let's go. Let's laugh. We are imperfect after all.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Imperfect Us podcast.
I'm Leanne Camilleri.
And I'm Lisa Downs. As hosts of the Imperfect Us podcast, we share relatable stories that celebrate we are all perfectly imperfect humans leading perfectly imperfect lives. We discover practical and evidence-based strategies that draw on the science of wellbeing and positive psychology that help us to uncover the barriers that might hold us back from being our authentic selves and turn them into opportunities so that we can show up more consistently, doing what we really aspire to do and who we want to be.
We acknowledge the Wadawurrung and the Kaurna people as traditional custodians of the beautiful lands on which this podcast is being recorded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend this respect to other First Nations people who are here with us today. So, let's get started.
Hey there, before we start today's episode, we want to let you know that part of this conversation refers to suicide, which we know can be distressing. So we ask you to please take care of yourself. If you need any resources or support, please go to beyondblue.org, or for 24-hour free counselling in Australia, call Lifeline on 131114. Hi everyone, today we're chatting with Dr. Phil Richmond. Dr. Phil is a practicing veterinarian and the founder of Flourishing Veterinary Consultants. He advocates for positive culture and individual, team and organisational psychological health, safety and wellbeing in veterinary workplaces. Dr. Richmond leads and is involved in state, national and international projects for advancing workplace wellbeing and culture in veterinary medicine. He is the Florida Veterinary Medical Association's Professional Wellbeing Committee Chair and a member and advisor for several national committees and boards for workplace suicide prevention, psychological health and safety, and veterinary wellbeing. Dr. Richmond is a speaker and published writer and was awarded the FVMA's Gold Star for Service in 2019 and Veterinarian of the Year in 2021. As well as this, he has been awarded the Uncharted Veterinary Community Founders Award in 2023. Let's meet Dr. Phil Richmond. Phil, thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to be speaking with you today, and we would love to hear about what led you to the work that you do.
Yeah, and thanks for asking, because isn't it always interesting that, I don't know that all of us decided when we were 5 or 6 years old that, what I want to do when I grow up is I want to work in well-being in the workplace or be a coach. Some of us may, but oftentimes there's something that drove us, something, gave us the passion to want to do this. So I am a practicing veterinarian in the US and Florida, and also have the opportunity. I'm very grateful. I get to work on a lot of state projects, national projects, and international projects around psychological health and safety, workplace well-being, and that sort of thing. So why in the heck is a veterinarian working in that area? And so my story is that from the time I was about 15, I had one tool in the toolbox to address anxiety, to address any depression, to address any of those things. And that was alcohol and substances. And so for me, that worked. That unscrewed that tightening of that screw in my chest or right in my gut that would happen. It would kind of unravel that a little bit. And it would make me feel, the other thing that it would make me feel is a sense of belonging. Is oftentimes I didn't feel like I belonged, or I didn't feel like I had a place, or that I was isolated, which is the opposite, of course, of what we want with well-being. So as time went on, the tool that was in the toolbox, I went to university, and as things progressed, so did my drinking. But the challenging thing, and again, so caveat, as we said, veterinarians, 2 veterinarians in the house, lots of animals in the background doing what they do. But so going through school, I still did well in school, and it allowed me to rationalize my drinking as that, well, I can't have a problem because I'm performing well. And then I get into vet school, which in the US is, because of the nature of veterinary schools in the US, there's just less veterinary schools than there are medical schools. So it's harder to get in sometimes. So I'm performing at this level and thinking, rationalizing my use. Also, having a lot of those thinking traps, having a lot of those cognitive distortions that we talk about that really negatively affects my resilience. These things go through vet school. So I graduate, and now I'm in practice. And now the perfectionist tendencies that allowed me to get into vet school, not having an ability to accept failure, those things, as well as burnout. So I was working about 60 to 70 hours a week. And I want to say that my workplace did not do that to me. My workplace was actually very supportive. I was working on my days off because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. Mm-hmm. So I really ran myself into the ground. And so relatively quickly, after being a new graduate veterinarian, I got into a very, very dark place. And so I was drinking and using every night. And I would come home and I would say, if A, B, or C happens, I'm going to choose to end my life. And so thank goodness my colleagues recognized what was going on with me. They could see the changes in me, and they were courageous enough to step in and get me the help that I needed. So as a young veterinarian, suicidal, about a year and a half out of school, I go into a treatment center, and I'm full of shame. I'm full of guilt. What are people going to think of me? I'm weak. How could I not control this myself? And then got into treatment and learned a lot of the tools that we learn in Wellbeing through 12-step recovery, through cognitive behavioral therapy. A number of these tools gave me the tools to love veterinary medicine again, and really gave me a joy and a level of gratitude that I didn't have before. And so what we find, and the reason why this is important in veterinarians, is that in the US, as is in the UK, as is in Australia and New Zealand, veterinarians are at a significantly higher risk of ending our own life than the general population. We also have generally speaking, depending on the studies, have a higher incidence of mental illness. Some studies do say that we're about the same, definitely higher perfectionist tendencies. And so where I'm going with this is that I felt like I was given an answer. I was given the tools to love veterinary medicine again and live a beautiful and rich life. And so I just really wanted to be able to give back. And about 10 years into my recovery, I realized that I really wanted to try to do this on a larger level. And so it was at that point, I was like, well, I'm just some veterinarian who went to AA meetings. Who's going to listen to me? I know this stuff works, but how do I find the evidence-based tools? And then I found out about resilience. I found out about compassion fatigue. I found out about positive psychology. And all of these things resonated as evidence-based things that meshed with my lived experience. And so it gave me the tools to be able to describe what worked from an evidence-based fashion, and also mesh that again with my experience as a clinician. And so that was where I really, really got excited about carrying the principles of well-being and positive psychology and positive organizational scholarship into the profession.
That's just incredible, Phil, the story. I mean, it really touched my heart a lot for you to be so vulnerable in sharing that story too. So a big thank you for that. But I also really love that you really have that love of learning and continue to do that even through that time of struggle, and that you found the pieces of gold that helped you to get towards where you are now, and the significant impact that you're having on other people, probably not just veterinarians, but in particular working with veterinarians who really do have a very high level of stress and emotional challenges in the profession. I'm just wondering whether you'd be able to share some of that that impact in the profession because there are so many challenges. In my mind, I was thinking, every time I go to our vet, we've got 3 puppy dogs and we've had a few in our past with a whole lot of other things. And I'm always just in awe of the work that they do, but they also see the sadness in it. So when we've had to, put our puppies down, for example, they see families that are upset. There's a whole lot of things that go on. And I just wonder what sort of challenges from your perspective do they have, and how can you help and understand that impact of this profession that it has on other people's well-being in the field?
Yeah. And so the interesting thing is that while we are veterinarians, and the veterinary medicine does pose some relatively specific challenges to our well-being, we're also human beings first, that we're taught to be veterinarians. So what's interesting, and this is why a lot of the principles that we learn about in positive psychology work well, with clinicians and resonate with clinicians or physicians or with accountants or with roofers or in the construction industry in the US is another area, because we are human beings, of course. But to answer your question specifically, the interesting thing around veterinary medicine is that there are a few things that are specific to veterinary medicine that pose some challenges. Now, we do know, as far as for instance, in Australia, the psychosocial hazards or psychosocial risks are now law, or that we have to measure those. We have to address those in our workers. Unfortunately, the US is probably about 10 years behind that. So there are things that measure with that. Like when we talk about job demands during COVID, for instance, I can give you my own experiences that I went from seeing maybe 20 to 25 patients a day upwards of almost doubling that to 40, 45 patients a day. And it was that was what we ended up having to do. And we can always do that to a point. We can put our resilience allows us to put our foot on the pedal for a little bit, but at some point, and oftentimes it happens like that, is that we reach burnout. And so that's one of the things in veterinary medicine, is being conscious of the cognitive demands, because oftentimes we're having to make very thoughtful decisions, or we're having to make these heavy decisions multiple times a day.
Is that where compassion fatigue also becomes a little bit more present, when you're working those extra hours and everything's doubling up, and because you're so compassionate for, whatever the animal is, that all of a sudden you're just doing too much?
And so what's interesting is that technically, depending on where we get our information around compassion fatigue, I happen to have taken a certification on compassion fatigue from one of the instructors at Florida State University. And Florida State University in the US was where, and my goodness, I forget the professor's name, but I had kind of written the first papers, if you will, on compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue technically is a combination of secondary traumatic stress. So most of us have heard of post-traumatic stress, or having that primary traumatic stress, but secondary traumatic stress. So euthanasia, being next to trauma, being associated with traumatic events. So that's secondary traumatic stress in combination with burnout, which burnout technically is a systems issue. With some of these psychosocial risks that we talk about with job demand and autonomy and these overwhelming external factors. So yes, and kind of throwing some more of these wonky terms, but one of the other things that happens in veterinary medicine is this concept of moral injury. And so they first started looking at moral injury in soldiers, in the military, where they observed things that were against their ethics or their morals, and they were not in a place to make a change, or they couldn't affect that. And we see that in first responders. We see that. I mean, we can see that in many different areas, but in veterinary medicine, where we really see that is because veterinary medicine, and I'll speak for the US, because the US healthcare system, we have insurance and that type of thing. And we do have pet insurance in the US, but it's not utilized very well. So what happens is oftentimes we have to make financial decisions on a pet's health where we are kept because this external factor, around finances don't allow us to perform what we know would be the best medicine. And that's challenging. And so it's hard to be in that position. And what I would say is as a younger veterinarian, and I would say that every veterinarian has been through this, is that, for instance, you get a 1-year-old Labrador puppy. Puppy runs out of the house, gets hit by a car and fractures a leg or pelvis or something of that nature, where it's a significant injury, fixable theoretically, but in US terms, now potentially an $8,000 to $10,000 treatment plan. That's a significant amount of financial resources. And sometimes we're in a position where we have to make a decision to recommend euthanasia, which would not be what we would given without finances, that's not what we would recommend. 25-year-old veterinarian, just out of vet school, and the trauma of that, and this is that secondary trauma, the trauma of that situation, and then having a family who doesn't have those financial resources by no fault of their own, but they are having a challenge processing that. And then anger comes out, because that's sometimes how we, unfortunately, as human beings, will respond to that and then say, you SOB, I thought you loved animals and you're telling me that I have to, euthanize my pet instead of fixing my pet. And as a new grad veterinarian, that is who've spent, the last 10 years of their life, to go to school to become a veterinarian, and to have somebody then say, you heartless POS, all you care about is money, which nothing as veterinarians really couldn't be farther from the truth. So those things, that moral injury in those types of situations, do weigh on us as veterinarians.
And I can see how that happens a lot as a pet owner myself. And having times where we've had a crisis with one of our pets, and there's so many emotions and things that you experience, and everyone's caught up in the whirlwind of it. I can't imagine what it might feel like for a young person just finishing and coming into the field and experiencing the intense emotion that those scenarios often bring. Dr. Phil, you talked about previously about that understanding resilience, having a better understanding around compassion fatigue and positive psychology really helped you to perhaps understand yourself better. And I think about this field of well-being, often there is a bit of me search that plays a part. And so, having that understanding of how to manage your experience in a situation is powerful. How does the understanding of well-being help people in this field cope with the emotional toll of their work?
So what I would say is, on an individual basis, now certainly self-care and those types of things are vitally important, is, making sure that we're taking time away from work. Can we throttle down? Can we try to quiet down our thoughts, meditation and some of the tools that we use. What I'll also say, though, is that these skills of resiliency, and depending on who, which school of thought we want to follow and what those specific skills of resiliency are, the two that I've found that are most impactful, one is cognitive empathy. And where this is very important is that if I'm in that situation now, where a pet has been hurt and there's, and we're in a situation where maybe even if money was no object, we still would have a challenge having a favorable outcome, is that I can sit and be with that pet owner, and that we can make the best decision together and that there's no judgment I try to make the clients feel, and I wouldn't, this is not just me, but is that concept of mattering. And like Chris Peterson said, other people matter, is that when it cannot be us versus them, but working together, and having shared decision-making and outcomes together, that's impactful. And can I put myself in that other person's shoes? And can I have compassion for where they're at? Can I have empathy first and then compassion? And it takes energy to be able to do that, though, is that I have to not be in a heightened state. But empathy, one, and then two is when we talk about cognitive behavioral coaching, or when we talk about those thinking traps, and when I have the sign, well, we're not going to have the video, but I have a sign in my office right up here. The old Walt Whitman quote, be curious, not judgmental. And that's one of the best, most impactful statements that I try to share, with people that I talk to, is that can I assume good intent? When something happens, can I make the charitable assumption? And what I'll say is that if just practicing those two areas of resiliency to the best of my ability gives me a significant chance at being happy. That, as well as practicing gratitude, hunting the good stuff, knowing that I have a negativity bias, and how do I combat that, is that I try to look at the good things as well as the things that are challenging, and then weigh those at the end of the day. But really, cognitive empathy and challenging my thinking. I think those are two of the most impactful things that we can do as clinicians and as human beings, really, that are around well-being. Yeah.
I think that could be used in not even just veterinarian, but in other places.
100%.
As you were telling us about that story, Dr. Phil, I was thinking about two situations that happened to our family with our puppies at the time. And we had a situation where both a cat actually and a dog the dog actually was a baby, like you talked about when that little puppy ran across the road. Yeah. She fell, and her little paw, she was only tiny, had fallen into the gap on our veranda, and she flipped over, and it actually broke something in her pelvis. I can't remember what it was. And we were beside ourselves thinking, what do we do? Yeah. And we actually had that big conversation with our veterinarian, who is probably practicing without even knowing some of the strategies you have. Yeah. And he held a space for us to have the conversation with him, and we nutted everything out. But we weren't the ones who were angry with the veterinarian. We were the ones going, you're the expert, help us to understand what the best option is. She ended up having a massive operation, and she had to go to Melbourne, and it cost us, like, I can't tell you how much, a lot. Right. And she's thriving now. And so for us, it was just the best situation. And I could tell that veterinarian had actually put themselves into our shoes, gave us the information, but allowed us to make the decision. Yeah. Amazing.
And that's really it, is can we share that information in a space where, like you said, is that there's not a place of judgment. It's just these are our options. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just what do we all come together to make that decision. And as a clinician, my job is just to give you as much information as possible, so that we can all make the best decision together, and that I support you no matter what way we go. I'm supportive of the choice that you make. Yeah.
And you're really creating that culture, aren't you, in that space of that safety and care.
Yes. Yep.
Which is, a lot of that work that Michelle McQuaid and Dr. Paige Williams as well. Yeah. Really looking at that space. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Phil. Every time I say Dr. Phil, I feel like you're this superstar. I just thought I'd share that with you.
I see the benefit also of really understanding the field of cognitive behavioural therapy, Dr. Phil, and understanding how our thoughts show up, especially in a field where you're caring for and relating with others, and in high emotion scenarios on a regular basis. Understanding how we respond to those situations would be very helpful in being able to manage ourselves in those scenarios.
Yep. And knowing too is that is understanding, we talked about the me search, or like what would have I done the work on myself to know, do I know my triggers? Do I know when I'm getting into a heightened state, when that sympathetic nervous system is kicking in? Can I do something? Can I understand too that when I'm in that, to be of service to the people around me, if it's appropriate, as long as I'm not running or something like that, can I throttle that response down, see where that's coming from, what's triggering in that in me, and then trying to then be there for that person. And that's one of those things too, where is understanding that, when we think it's, as human beings, we think it's cause and effect. Like you say something and I react. And it's like there's that, it's the old ABC, is that there has to be a B. I have to have some belief, whether I'm conscious of it or not, to elicit that emotion. And understanding the power that has is that when I change that B, when I change that belief about what that event was, there's power there. And there's an ability for me to then be more of service. And I don't do it perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, but the knowledge around that and working to the best of my ability to do that has just made significant differences. And it's almost like, it's life-changing when we find that out, the power that we have in changing our beliefs. Yep.
Totally agree. And we don't have to be perfect. As humans,
right.
we have some of those perfectionist tendencies. We've got to get it all right,
Right.
But you just demonstrated before, just taking a breath. We don't have to get that perfect. It provides that shift and that opportunity to recalibrate or shift from the situation.
Yeah. And what's fascinating too is that I've found over probably the past couple of years, I would say, what I end up going back to as a tool more often than any other tool, even though for me, cognitive empathy, gratitude, and cognitive behavioral coaching, those tools are very impactful for me. But self-compassion, and this is where, when you were just talking about, like, that is more than anything else, that is the tool and the concept and the lessons and the trying to convey that concept and utilizing that, because it's just, when I talk to veterinary professionals and when we talk about thinking traps, or those cognitive distortions of personalization, me, it's always my fault. I'm to blame 100% for a situation, no matter what ever anything else was external, is learning to challenge that, and then giving ourselves the grace that we would a dear friend. These things that we talk about, and I really honor the power in that tool, of self-compassion. Yeah.
It's interesting that you've raised that today, because Leanne and I just recorded, we had a bit of a break in our podcast, pardon me, and we both had a few challenges to deal with and struggles.
Yeah.
And in that recording, we talked about the power of self-compassion, and particularly that those three pieces with Kristen Neff's work in being aware, mindfully aware of what's happening. And I know we have this sort of thinking trap script, I guess, where we talk about, oh, hello, there's a little bit of a struggle there. That's that first part. And then the next part is the part where we're talking about, oh, here's our common humanity versus that isolation, where we're saying, oh, okay, so, but I'm human after all, and none of us are perfect, and these things are going to happen, and struggle is there. And when we have struggle, we have learning. And then the next part is that kindness. How do you treat yourself as a friend would? In saying, okay, so this will pass, and what do I need right now to move forward past this struggle? Or do I need to sit in struggle for a bit longer? So it is a beautiful, beautiful tool to have and to challenge those thinking traps as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Phil, can you help us to understand how prioritising self-care can contribute positively to the overall mental health and emotional health of veterinarian professionals?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been even more at the forefront since the pandemic, since COVID hit. And speaking in the US, which this is a global phenomenon, but in the US, we're now facing a veterinary shortage. So you may notice as pet owners, it's harder to get into see your veterinarian than it was 4 or 5 years ago, where sometimes you could get in the same day. And in the US, it's not uncommon now to have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks sometimes for an appointment. And where that's coming from, and multifactorial after the pandemic. But what's important is that as veterinary professionals, is that if we don't schedule time, and it's the old, if we don't schedule time for our wellness, we're going to open the door for illness, and that. And what I want to share is that for me, giving my lived experience, up until COVID started about March of 2020, the group that I was with, we were very successful. I mean, still, that group is still very successful, but saw a number of patients a day, but we were adamant about taking our breaks. I mean, it was sacrosanct. So I made sure that our technical team, our medical support team, had their lunches, that they left the building. We had physical fitness area upstairs that we put together, but that it was important that was honored. That our team knew that, I mean, emergencies happen, but in general, we would schedule things to allow for the break. For me, what I also noticed is that I could be very effective in a 3 to 4 hour period with foot on the gas. We would see the number of patients, but then I had a 2-hour block in the middle of the day, and I could leave the hospital. I could go to the gym, could work out, do cardio and meditate, come back, and it was like a whole new day. And then I got to have that energy back for the remainder of the day. Then COVID hit. And now we're having to process patients in a different way. So we were doing curbside, where we had people couldn't come in the building. And so we were having to do different ways of intaking patients. And all the other things, we go through a collective trauma as the world was going through, and all the external things. However, one of the things that happened, and not just that the gyms closed, but I stopped taking that break in the middle of the day, which it was important to me to make sure that I did it. I made sure that the staff had it, because I didn't want the staff to burn out, but I did. So, I also am very grateful to work with the wonderful people at the Wellbeing Lab. And we, in January of 2021, we ran the PERMA workplace survey with my hospital. And the only two, just because the practice manager and I spoke, only 2 of us were struggling was myself and our practice manager. So luckily we had protected, we had we really wanted to make sure that we protected the staff, but we took it all on ourselves. And so it got to the point where I hit a brick wall, and I just told our practice manager, I just said, I can't keep seeing this number of patients anymore. Like, I'm not going to make it. And I don't mean, I know my story. I could see where I was going. And I'm like, I can't continue at this pace any longer. And so, we did some things with the schedule, but it took me a while, because once we hit burnout, generally speaking, as long as when we have to take the external factors out, it takes 4 to 6 months for us to recover, from burnout. And so we don't want to get there in the first place. And so, from a business point of view, as a clinician, we don't want our clinicians to get there, because then and again, with the shortage, if I'm in burnout, I can't see effectively the number of patients that I did and serve the people that I did. So ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. How do we prevent that from happening in the first place? So self-care is vital, not only for our own mental health, but for our patients, for our team members. Because if I'm in burnout or if I'm stressed and I'm up here, remember, it's very challenging for me to tap into cognitive empathy. If I'm in stress mode all the time, if my sympathetic nervous system is triggered all the time, it's hard for me to be that person and to have extra emotional energy to give. So, yeah. So yes, vital for clinicians. Yeah.
So true. So true.
Interesting that you pointed out that you're making sure the team's well-being was front and center, but it took a bit to realize that your own well-being was being challenged. I think as professionals in this space, I certainly identified with you, Phil, because I see it and experience it too, and I think that's understanding, having that good understanding of ourselves, but also that the power in understanding it, from a workplace context, understanding where everyone's at, and sometimes our well-being, it's we know we need something, but it's just, what do I need? You can feel that your batteries are getting low and you don't really know how to recharge them, or you're feeling you need something but you're not really sure, you don't understand. Doing something like assessing the well-being of your workplace is really powerful, because then you can all get on the same page and start to have that shared language.
Right. And then ironically, what do we know about leaders, and their effect on the well-being of their team? So while I thought I was doing the right thing by trying to protect the well-being of our team members, is that in a leadership role, if I'm not taking care of my own well-being, I'm going to have a detrimental effect on the team, on the people around me. And so that was what I started also seeing, is that again, when my empathy goes down and that my stress level goes up, I may be short with some of my team members. That psychological safety that we crafted over years, which takes so much to build up, but is so delicate and fragile, and if we're not constantly trying to build it up and shore it up, that we can bring it down. And so that was also something that I, from seeing myself kind of sitting up on my shoulder, saying, look how you're reacting to these situations. Like, are you indeed actually helping the well-being of your team if you're not taking care of yourself? And so as leaders, when we're in leadership roles, we can't, being a martyr is not taking care of our team members. It's actually has the opposite effect, as we know from the data, is that the outsized effect that leaders have on the well-being of workplace.
I feel that sort of reminds me a lot about Adam Grant's work about givers and takers and matches.
Yeah.
I was thinking about earlier on in the top of this conversation, when we were talking about that perfectionist trait. Sometimes when we're leaders and we are so compassionate about the work we do too much. We do give and give and give and give. And in those situations, you were doing what you thought was right, but there was that element of, hang on, where's that balance? I need to be looking after me first. And I think givers are naturally overgive a lot of the time. Yeah, which is really important.
And I love telling the story, the study that Adam Grant did. And I think it was University of Pennsylvania's medical school, but he looked at the med students, and when I talk to veterinary professionals, and I use that exact, the exact one is, guess who was on the body, givers, matchers, and takers. Guess who performed lowest? Taker, it's givers, the givers. Yep. Yeah. And then guess who was who performed highest? And then I'll get the takers did, or the matchers did. I'm like, no, it was the givers too. And then it's like, and then you get what's the difference? And then I say, what are we horrible at setting as veterinary professionals? And then everybody, boundaries. And it's like, yes, we're not I love that term, protective giver. Is that I'm doing these things to enrich, and that I have gratitude, and that I bring meaning and purpose, but that I'm protective of my well-being in doing that. And that is, to your point, is exactly what I was not doing during COVID is that I was trying to give, I gave too much to the detriment of myself, to the point that I had to really look at where was that in the me search. I love that. I was looking inside and saying, getting curious, where's that coming from? Why do I think that this is, and that's a week's worth of,
it's good for you to be sharing that with other leaders too, because it is so easy to do. And I know myself, I've definitely put myself in that box and had to work really hard on that inner dialogue as to what's going on and how can I support. Instead of thinking, oh no, but I've still got to be able to, I've definitely got enough energy to do that. Well, actually, no, I don't. I can do it, but I couldn't do it well.
Dr. Phil, besides your own fantastic work, we would love to hear from you. Is there a book or a podcast or TED Talk that you might recommend to our listeners today?
So I would say the book that, and there's so many wonderful books that are out there, but the TED Talk and book that really got me hooked initially was Shawn Achor's The Happiness Advantage, and then his TED Talk, which he is one of the funniest, he's like a stand-up comedian. He's great delivery, funny, but evidence-based positive psychologist from Harvard, just very dynamic speaker. But when I read his book, The Happiness Advantage, it was before I'd gotten into just about everything else. It was like my first foray into positive psychology. That was the first book. And I've read so many wonderful, wonderful books since, but that is, that was the one that that hooked me.
I'm just wondering if you have your own, I guess, personal favourite tip or a strategy that you've been using in the veterinary industry really to care for your wellbeing or for other veterinarians in your practice, and what might that be?
So the thing that I found for me, and so it's not a panacea, and it's not necessarily for everybody, as Sonia Lubomirsky would say, as far as the interventions or ways to bring on happiness, is a gratitude exercise, so a gratitude list. And so for me, remember what my tool was alcohol and substances. And it was because those things changed my brain chemistry. It changed the perception, my perception of the world around me, and it changed the lens through which I viewed the world. And what I have really found is that when I'm open to doing it, if I'm frustrated or I'm finding a challenge or something like that, I would walk into my office, and in my bottom, or the drawer right next to my desk, I had a journal. And so I would just take it out, I would write down the date, and I would just start writing things that I was grateful for. And for me, it wasn't the number. I wrote things down until I felt differently. And what was just amazing to me is because I believed in it. And again, for me, for me, gratitude is one of those tools that resonates, is that it changed how I felt about the world around me. And so nothing out there, all the things that had upset me or whatever it was that was out there, nothing changed. I changed through the power of my perception. And so that tool is one of my best, go-to tools is a gratitude list. Yeah.
Really love that. And one of the reasons why Leah and I both, gratitude is just huge. And it was probably, I think for us, one of the first things that we practiced when we did our Masters of Positive Psychology.
Yeah.
But it also now, with all of the new research, and particularly with Dr. Lindsay Odes, a professor, when he talks about the language and the importance of language, and in the world there's so much more negative language than there is positive. Right. But when we focus on what we can see that is positive, then there's more likely we're going to see more. And so when you have that gratitude practice, all of a sudden those other parts go quiet. Yeah.
Yep.
Just
absolutely.
beautiful.
Thank you so much for your time today. We have just really loved opening our eyes to some of the things that you need to navigate, and as well as your honesty in sharing your story has been very powerful. So I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
To finish up, where is the best place for people to find out more about you and the incredible work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. So I love, just a huge fan of LinkedIn. It's like the people that I follow are all very positive, people in leadership and business and that type of thing. So LinkedIn, Dr. Phil Richmond / Dr. Phil Richmond is where you can find me or do a search. And then my consulting website is flourishingphoenix.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phil. We'll be sure to share that in our show notes as well, so people can contact you if they want to.
Wonderful. Yep. Thank you.
His story is just phenomenal, but the way that he went through struggle very early on, but he was so aware the whole time and was able to flip and turn that around. They often call that the hero's journey in a lot of stories, that cinema mainly, where, he's been in that really big hardship, but he's really made that effort to find out what's been going on, much more vulnerable, and then going ahead and making a decision to try and change that and find out about it. His tools and his really high understanding of wellbeing science is fantastic. And I really love that he's really building a culture of safety and care for his people, but also more importantly himself. Because as a leader, how do you look after your people if you're not for yourself?
Yeah. I like what he said, cognitive behavioural coaching and that self-coaching piece, understanding when it shows up, understanding what your triggers are.
But also to really challenge those thinking traps, those critical voices that pop up, and you can actually hook on and believe those, or you can actually stop and have a rethink as to what that might look like, which is why that coach is so important.
Yeah. Oh, wow. All right. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Phil.
Yeah. See you soon. Bye for now.
And thank you for listening to the Imperfect Us podcast. As always, we are extremely grateful to our executive producer, Brenton Ainsworth, for helping us to put this episode together. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with someone you care about, and we would be grateful if you could rate this podcast on iTunes. To continue the conversation and see what we're up to, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Just search for Imperfect Us. Bye for now.